We grew up in Coos Bay, Oregon. It's like a logging, fishing town. Um, Back then it was anyway. You got your oceans and you got your mountains and your trees and your rivers and lakes, so it is a very pretty place. There was 5 siblings, and of course my mom and dad. Carolyn was the oldest. Janie was second born. Rachel was the third. I was fourth, and then my brother is the youngest of the family.
Despite their age difference, sisters Janie and Joyce are inseparable.
Janie and I were the closest as far as siblings go. So we were playing with baby dolls and running around like little toddlers would. Running for Janie was something happy for her. She liked being outside. Even though she was older, we were similar because her functioning level was the same as mine.
Janie is developmentally impaired.
It was the schools that noticed something was kind of different. It was hard for Janie to sit still. She got upset very easily. She would throw things. Janie would also often run away, but she'd always come back.
The Oregon State Police received a call of what they called a walk-away from Fairview Training Center. It was a mental health facility. When the state police responded, they learned that it was Janie Landers, an 18-year-old female with developmental disabilities that had walked away from the facility.
Janie was 18 years old. But she didn't look 18. Janie was about 5'1", I think somewhere around 90 pounds, dripping wet, and the developmental age of about an 8-year-old.
Staff members tell police that 18-year-old Janie has been missing for several hours.
Detectives start gathering information. They interviewed her teacher first, and they found out that Janie was last seen in her classroom, and that Bill Graff, her counselor, he had come in and spoken with her while she was in class for a short while. And a short time later, she stormed out of the classroom. And the teacher said that she saw Janie walking from the classroom towards Kozer Cottage, which was the housing unit where she lived. But Janie didn't arrive at Kozer Cottage where she was supposed to, and then they listed her as AWOL.
The staff was all talking about it up until end of shift. And we hadn't heard any word other than, nope, they haven't found her yet.
Janie was last seen right before 2:00 p.m.
Janie's been at Fairview for about 10 years.
Janie was about 7 when she went to Fairview for the first time. I would have been about 4 years old. My parents wanted whatever would help Janie. At this time, they had 3 other kids at home, and here's Janie needing some help that they didn't know how to get. Coos County Mental Health determined that she did have learning disabilities. Her IQ was low, but they also felt that she had some kind of psychological issues going on and recommended for her to go to Fairview for further testing.
In 1980, I started working with a group of people who all had intellectual disabilities to help move from Fairview Training Center into group situations. Individuals living at Fairview Training Center were either put there literally by the state because they may have acted out or people felt they were at risk, or they just simply qualified by having a disability.
Over time, the separation from her sister wears on Joyce.
It was very emotional for me. She was who I played with, so I didn't have that anymore. And I would be sad all the time because I never got to see her for such a long time. I miss playing with her. We both loved it outside. I didn't get to do that with her anymore. It was sad. She would call me on the phone. She'd ask me for letters. She loved me writing long letters. It was hard for my parents because they lived so far away. As time went by, my dad would call the school about at least getting some visit time with her or having her come home and spend time with us. He'd go up to the schools, and sometimes he'd get to see her, and other times he wouldn't. He'd get there, he wouldn't know that she'd been moved to a different cottage, so he'd have to schedule another visit. The staff there at Fairview would do assessments, and they would say she needs more of this type of training or this kind of behavioral classes. So they would encourage my parents to let her stay longer.
Eventually, Janie becomes a permanent resident at Fairview.
Janie eventually became ward of the state, so the state had that control, my parents didn't. And that was really hard for my mom. I had come home from school and my dad asked me and the rest of my siblings to have a seat, that he had something to tell us. And he proceeded to tell us about a call that he got regarding Janie, that the school had told him that she was missing. They felt that she would come back after a couple hours because she had gotten upset earlier in the day, that everything would be okay.
Police searched the grounds at Fairview for several hours and find nothing.
There were rumors like crazy, the search for someone that walked off from their cottage. But I was afraid this was way more serious.
As the investigation into the disappearance of 18-year-old Janie Landers continues, a Fairview employee offers crucial information.
I worked at Fairview for approximately 3.5 years. I was a psychiatric aide. The day that Janie disappeared, it was just as normal as could be. I usually left home shortly after 2 to go to work. My shift was 3 to 11. When I turned a corner close to the main driveway that I went up every day, I saw this girl, and I recognized her as a resident. I did not know her name, but I had seen her on campus. I see a car that's parked on the shoulder and a gentleman walking in front of my car. I thought, I don't recognize him. This is kind of fishy. Why would that man be out of his car? What is he even doing getting close to her? And I thought, should I pick her up or should I not? I wanted to, but there were strict rules against it. So I quickly went up to my cottage and called security. Security went down and checked. They didn't find anyone.
Witness information came into play, and they started figuring out that that was most likely Janie. Detectives get a description of the individual that Janie was talking to.
He was wearing a t-shirt and jeans, He was maybe 35, 40. He had a big pot belly, about 5'8" or 5'10". He needed a haircut. It was kind of shaggy.
She also gave her information about the vehicle.
It was a gold color sedan, 4-door.
Now we have more of a possibility of an abduction. Like, she didn't just walk away, she was talking to somebody. Fairview had hundreds of employees, and there was no restricted access to the facility, so it could have literally been anyone.
Detectives zero in on the last person at Fairview to speak with Janie.
Bill Graff was a person of interest. He was a counselor, somebody that had close contact with her, had access to Janie, and that she would have gone to or trusted. So we would want to know what the nature of that conversation, but also what the nature of their relationship was.
I met Jane probably in 1977, 1978. I was her one-to-one therapist. Jane was like working with a 9-year-old. She would like to color. She didn't really know how to read. She was very kind and loving. She had a lot of skills. She would clean up where she lived, an area, wash dishes, dry dishes.
Janie Landers was like a lot of patients at Fairview, where they could go live in a less restrictive setting and practice more independence.
At 18 years old, Janie lived in a group home with other Fairview patients.
3.5 months before Jane was missing, she was still living in the house next to the group home. She lived with another lady called Cheryl. They must have gotten some type of altercation. The other lady was warming up some chili. Jane grabbed the chili off the stove and poured it over Cheryl's head and burned her.
This altercation wasn't totally out of the blue for a patient like Janie Landers. She definitely struggled with appropriate responses to frustration.
At that time, Jane was taken from the group home and placed back in state hospital. She was upset.
Janie soon has another setback. Her insurance plan changes after returning to the hospital. Therapy with Bill Graff is no longer covered.
I told Jane that I couldn't work with her anymore. I told her that I won't be back the next day. And that's the day she took off.
She was no longer in the group home. Bill Graff was familiar to her. She trusted him. Now she's kind of in this big change where she's now placed back at Fairview. To her, her whole world has now changed again.
Police have some questions for Bill Graff.
The witness gave the description to the police, and I almost fit that description. But I hadn't done anything.
They interviewed Mr. Graff and polygraphed him, and the result was that he passed, and they believed that he was truthful.
I think everybody recognized that her vulnerable nature made Janie a prime target for someone that would want to do her harm.
With no particular direction other than the description of this unknown male, the thought was that the motivation for abducting this young female was most likely to sexually assault her.
Detectives run a background check on Fairview employees, and several of them stand out.
So we were focusing on employees that we were able to determine had prior sex offenses.
In 1979, Oregon did not have a sex offender registry, making it difficult for Fairview to screen employees for sex crime convictions.
But despite all the efforts, there weren't any employees that stuck out as a person of interest in the initial days of the investigation. The longer that time went by, the chances of finding her alive were dwindling.
In Coos Bay, the Landers family waits for news of Janie.
I had just recently turned 14, and I do remember asking my dad, probably a couple of times a day, before I go to school, have you heard anything about Janie? And each day it was, no calls. They're still looking. I kept hoping and praying that she would go back to the school, return there, be safe.
A landowner was checking his field and the perimeter of his property and discovered the body of a young female discarded at the edge of a farm field right off the highway.
Authorities knew they had one missing person. They knew that this was probably Janie.
When she's first discovered, she's lying face down in the bushes. And as they roll her, she's got an arm kind of up by her face. There was a lot of blood coming from some stab wounds on her neck area.
The victim is 18-year-old Janie Landers.
There wasn't a lot of evidence for blood there. There was no signs of a struggle. It was pretty clear that the body was just dumped in the bushes.
She had been stabbed somewhere else, and she had fought for her life.
Detectives canvassed the area and talked to the homeowners in the immediate vicinity, but they didn't find anything.
All I remember hearing at that time was that Janie's body was found at Silver Falls Park. The idea that I may have been the last person to see Janie alive, besides that man, haunts me to this day. I did feel guilty because I could have picked her up.
I have thought about her in that car and that man, with a knife, hurting her and killing her. Yeah, it hurts. It still hurts.
When my dad got the call about Janie, he had distress in his voice. I mean, he tells us Janie's body was found. It looked like she had been murdered. I didn't want to believe that they found her dumped somewhere. The first call that my dad got, there was no indication that it was serious, just that she was missing. They knew early on that she was seen talking to some stranger, and they didn't tell us that until after her body was found. It was like they were covering up stuff.
At some point during the day, they had a pretty good indication that she wasn't coming back and should have disclosed that to the family.
In the autopsy, one of the things that was determined was that her stomach contents were consistent with what was served at the noon meal at Fairview on March 9th. That information would suggest that she was killed shortly after she was last seen.
This was a vicious attack that Janie suffered. We learned that the actual cause of death was blunt force trauma to her head. There was some sort of instrument available to the offender to hit her in the head, and that would have killed her.
In 1979, the forensic capabilities were not DNA. What we were looking for was hair standards and fibers to do direct comparisons, fingerprints, And if we had blood, we were able to do some typing in order to narrow down a suspect pool. One earring was collected from Janie's ear, but the other one was missing. That was collected as evidence. And there were 4 hairs that were found in Janie's hand, like clutched in her fist, that were collected at autopsy.
We learned from the autopsy that she was not sexually assaulted. However, it was very clear to us that we were looking for a perpetrator who would prey on children or young women.
In 1979, when we want to broadcast information to the public, we were going through the newspaper primarily. The Statesman Journal was where we would generate leads and tips from.
Leona was descriptive enough that it gave detectives confidence to try to call in a sketch artist.
There was newspaper articles about Janie being missing, and the sketch of the suspect was put in the paper. Two women that worked at the food cart on Fairview saw the article in the paper and the sketch of the man last seen talking to Janie, recognized him as a man that they had served at the food cart the day she went missing on March 9th. We don't know who he was, but we know that he at least came and he had lunch there. We didn't have a lot of other information to go on.
My dad brought Janie back home to be buried. Her funeral was held at a church. I walk into the foyer area. The first thing I see is Janie's casket, and I just dropped to my knees. At that point, it came to a reality that she was gone. I couldn't even get up off the floor. I was just sobbing.
After the autopsy and the search warrant, law enforcement is still looking into who this individual was last seen with Janie, and we still don't have any real leads there. The investigation turns back towards who had contact and who had motive to harm Janie.
Investigators build a timeline leading up to Janie's disappearance. And that's when they learn of an incident with a fellow resident.
Janie had got into an altercation with another resident at that group home named Cheryl. Janie had caused some significant injury to her. Cheryl had a boyfriend named Ray Wright, who was around the same age. Ray didn't really care a whole lot for Janie.
Detectives started to look into Ray's background and determined that he was really upset about what had happened to his girlfriend. There was even rumors that he wanted to kill her.
Investigators bring Cheryl's boyfriend, Ray Wright, in for an interview.
He definitely had been on law enforcement's radar before. He seemed like somebody who would have a motive.
But Ray insists he did not kill Janie.
We were never able to confirm or deny his involvement.
And Cheryl had the same type of struggles that Janie had. She was a difficult witness, so both her and Ray fell off the radar as plausible suspects going forward.
The case slows over time because there's really no new information coming in. After about 1980 to 81, the case was put back on the shelf to work other active cases.
Joyce tries to keep the case alive, and police do what they can. But by the mid-'80s, the case goes as cold as the winter wind that blows across Coos Bay.
In all the calls I made to the Oregon State Police, they would tell me it's a cold case, it's gonna take a long time. Another year would go by and another 5 would go by. But we didn't give up on her.
A tip came into Salem Police Department. Individuals who said they were neighbors to Cheryl and Ray Wright, at some point close to the time Janie went missing, said that they heard Ray say that he killed Janie.
Cheryl and Ray were together when Janie was killed, but they'd split up by the time the case was reopened.
Cheryl was re-interviewed by detectives, and Cheryl said that she remembered seeing the truck that Ray drove, and she remembered seeing the earring that Janie had in the truck. That was a huge piece of information because we knew that Janie was missing the earring at autopsy. If we were able to find that earring and match it to Janie's other earring, that would have been a massive break in the case.
Now, 10 years later, police again go looking for Ray Wright and his truck.
Ray denied any involvement. He didn't have any other knowledge to provide about the injuries to Janie or anything of that nature. But eventually we figure out that that car was destroyed and we're never going to get any information out of it.
Ray was always someone that the police considered viable, but there was no evidence that connected him to Janie on this day at all.
Cheryl and Ray made statements and interviews, but we have to keep in mind that Cheryl and Ray both had mental disabilities as well.
What looked like a promising lead fizzles. Once again, the case goes cold.
Fairview Training Center ultimately closed. People started moving out of Fairview in the late 70s. And then in the 80s, there was a bigger push to start to move people out of the institution because Fairview just has a long history of people's rights being taken away. People were giving medications they shouldn't have. People were sterilized against their will. People were restrained.
When I heard Fairview was closing, I was probably one of the happiest persons on earth because I knew of the history of the facility. I learned about some of the residents being strapped down or locked in rooms. I know Janie experienced some of that. I often wonder, would my sister Janie be thriving today? The help that people like Janie gets today is so much different. And I think she would have done so much better had she gotten that chance. But she didn't. I was always hopeful that Janie's case would be solved. It just, part of that time, I was a young mom raising 3 little boys, and the focus was there.
Janie was still a huge part of Joyce's life. And I think Joyce really felt like she owed it to her older sister to get justice.
In 2015, I went to the Oregon State Police Department to speak to Detective Hinkle about Janie's case and the possibility of reopening it.
Joyce hangs her last hope of solving Janie's murder on the promise of new technology.
I talked to Detective Hinkle and a couple other officers. I knew just from my own studies and watching TV that the technology was better in 2015 than it was in 1979. They had the ability to test her clothing to see if anything was there, was there ability to match DNA. The times had changed.
Typically, the older the case is, the less likely it'll be solved, because the more that time has passed, the more the evidence is degraded. People have died. Witnesses are not able to be found.
This case had additional problems from the beginning because Fairview no longer existed at the time that I started the case. In 2015, Fairview had been gone for 15 years. My first steps in the investigation was to track down the case file and begin going through those case binders and learning what happened with the original investigation. I paid special attention to the autopsy report and the crime scene photographs. She had fought, obviously, as evident by the hairs in her hand and the defensive wounds on her arms.
Detective Hinkle focuses on Janie's stab wounds.
You can tell that the wounds are deep, that there was a lot of force behind these stab wounds, but there's also no hilt abrasion present. The hilt separates the handle from the blade, and the purpose of a hilt is to keep your hand from sliding down onto the blade when using that type of a knife. And to me, the lack of a hilt, that's significant because blood has the consistency of about motor oil when it's wet like that, and it's very common for someone's hand to slip down onto the blade and also become cut in the course of this type of an assault. So that would suggest to me that the killer was likely to have been cut by the knife in the course of this dynamic fight. And we had a high likelihood of finding DNA evidence on the body or on the clothing.
I'm an expert in bloodstain pattern analysis, where one examines different bloodstains to see how they may have been deposited. Was it transferred? Was it smeared? Was it spattered? When I reviewed the original report on the Janie Landers case, her clothing was submitted at that time for examination for trace evidence. The clothing obviously had blood on it, and it was ABO blood tested, but DNA didn't exist as a forensic technology in 1979.
Luckily, the evidence had been packaged in paper like it was supposed to be, so it didn't appear that it had been molded. We came up with a list of items we felt like had the best likelihood of giving us a DNA profile or a blood stain from the killer and not Janie.
I ended up collecting 4 isolated blood stains from Janie Landers' shirt to send to DNA that I thought might be transfers from the perpetrator. If the perpetrator had picked her up and had, say, a cut on his finger or hand, and he had grabbed her and maybe put her over his shoulder, that would be a location where his hand would naturally go to her back.
Nine months after Janie's shirt is submitted for testing, the results come back.
I got a call from Jen telling me that they found a DNA profile from an unknown male on a blood stain on Janie's shirt, which was super exciting because now we have a suspect. We don't know who they are, but we have a suspect.
Detective Hinkle came into my office to tell me they have a hit on the blood on Janie's sweater.
Almost 40 years after Janie Landers was murdered, cold case investigators finally close in on her killer.
I got a call from Jen telling me that there was a CODIS hit, and the suspect was Gerald Dunlap. So I wanted to know, who the hell is Gerald Dunlap? His DNA profile was in CODIS because he was sentenced and was in Oregon State Prison at some point.
Gerald Dunlap is a convicted sex offender, first arrested in the 1960s.
Gerald Dunlap was sent to prison for 99 years for the rape of a very young female victim in 1961 in the state of Tennessee. He was paroled, however, in 1973. He was only there for 12 years. It's not unusual in the United States back in the 70s for people to get really long sentences and only serve a small portion of it.
I was able to track down a photograph taken of Gerald Dunlap in Tennessee when he was paroled, and that photograph matched the forensic sketch very closely. So that confirmed that we were on the right track.
After he's released from a Tennessee prison, Dunlap is hired to work at Fairview Training Facility.
Dunlap worked in laundry. Payroll records from Fairview show that he was employed and working during the month of March in 1979. When we interviewed the co-workers and supervisors in laundry, they all said that they worked a day shift and every single person had a break at 2 p.m. That's the point where Janie went missing. One of the supervisors I interviewed in laundry said that he ended up having to fire Gerald because he had patted a female patient that worked in laundry on the butt. So that was another red flag, in addition to his prior rape offense from the 60s, and then the sexual assault case in the early 90s where he sexually assaulted his step-granddaughter. That case ended him up in Oregon State Prison.
What we were dealing with was a serial rapist, somebody who preyed upon young women.
The justice system failed. By letting him out, the justice system gave him a free card to go and harm another person and eventually murder my sister.
When we got the photograph of him, we did a double-blind photo lineup with the witnesses that were still alive. And they both picked Dunlap's photo out of that lineup.
When Detective Hinkle came to my home, he said, I have some pictures here that I'd like you to go through and see if you can identify anyone. I looked through them. This is the man that I saw there. And he says, yeah, we got him.
Janie's family finally knows who the killer is, but justice comes too late. Dunlap died in prison in 2002.
One moment I'm feeling elated. Yes, we have a match of DNA, but yet he's deceased. So right away I'm thinking, we don't even get to take him to court and find him guilty of what he did to Janie.
I was disappointed that Gerald Dunlap was dead. I want 12 jurors to come in and I want them to say that Gerald Dunlap is guilty of this crime.
Once Paige Clarkson made the determination officially that the case was at its legal conclusion, her and I drove down to Coos Bay and met with Joyce and her father and officially told them that the case was closed and that Gerald Dunlap murdered Janie.
I feel relieved knowing her case was solved and the person that did it died in prison where he belonged. Unfortunately, my mom passed away before her case was solved. But my dad was with me that day. That Detective Hinkle came, and he went from the very beginning of the case to the end. And he brought a brick from one of the cottages that Janie lived in. And on the front, it has her name and year of birth and year of death. My dad and I were looking at the brick and her little hair ties, and he looked at me. And as tears were going down his face, he asked me, "Can we now let Janie rest?"
The digital dashboard glowed softly in the pre-dawn darkness of June 6, 1996, casting a sterile, bluish hue across the quiet suburban living room on Eagle Drive in Rowlett, Texas. Outside, the neighborhood was wrapped in a profound, heavy silence, broken only by the occasional hum of a distant vehicle on the interstate or the rustle of summer leaves stirred by a warm midnight breeze. Inside the single-story residence, the atmosphere was ostensibly tranquil, belying the catastrophic violence that was about to rupture the fabric of an ordinary American family. Darren and Darlie Routeux, along with their infant son Drake, slept in the master bedroom upstairs, while their two older boys, 6-year-old Devin and 5-year-old Damon, slumbered peacefully on sleeping bags spread across the plush carpet of the downstairs den. It was a domestic scene repeated in millions of homes across the country, a portrait of suburban routine and familial safety. Yet, within the span of a few harrowing minutes, this sanctuary would transform into a chaotic, bloody crime scene that would polarize a community, baffle investigators, and spark one of the most enduring and fiercely contested legal controversies in modern American true crime history. The transition from peaceful slumber to absolute horror occurred without warning, leaving behind a maze of conflicting interpretations, physical anomalies, and psychological trauma that decades of subsequent legal scrutiny would fail to fully untangle. The exact sequence of events that began to unfold around 2:30 in the morning remains one of the most intensely scrutinized timelines in judicial annals. According to subsequent statements and investigative reconstructions, the household was abruptly disrupted by sounds that suggested an unlawful intrusion. Darlie Routeux would later maintain that she had fallen asleep on the couch downstairs before waking up to a chilling realization that an unauthorized presence was standing directly over her. In her accounts, the shadowy figure was a strange man, moving with purposeful stealth in the dim ambient light filtering through the windows. Panic, instantaneous and overwhelming, superseded sleep. Before she could fully process the threat or cry out for assistance, the confrontation escalated into physical violence. Darlie described being attacked, sustaining multiple injuries, including a severe laceration to her throat that narrowly missed her major carotid artery by millimeters, alongside defensive wounds on her arms and hands. The intruder, as her narrative unfolded, moved with ruthless efficiency toward the area where Devin and Damon were sleeping. The sleeping children, completely defenseless and trapped in the deep inertia of childhood sleep, became the primary targets of a frenzied knife assault. The weapon used in the attack was subsequently identified as a large, serrated kitchen knife retrieved from the family's own butcher block in the kitchen, a detail that would later become a cornerstone of both prosecutorial suspicion and defense debate. The sheer brutality of the stabbing inflicted catastrophic, fatal injuries on both boys, turning the carpeted den into a scene of devastating carnage. Amidst the unfolding nightmare, the psychological shockwave permeated the upper level of the home, eventually waking Darren Routeux from his sleep. Disoriented by the sudden commotion and the ambient sounds of distress echoing from downstairs, Darren descended into the living area to find a horrific tableau. The immediate aftermath was characterized by sensory overload, the smell of copper and iron from spilled blood, the dim lighting, the urgent cries, and the terrifying realization that his young sons were grievously wounded. Recognizing the immediate peril and the necessity of outside intervention, Darlie reached for the telephone to summon emergency services. The resulting 911 call, placed at approximately 2:31 a.m., instantly captured the raw, unvarnished terror of the moment. The audio recording preserves Darlie's voice, oscillating between frantic pleas for help, desperate screams, and moments of acute disorientation as the dispatcher struggled to extract coherent information from a scene of unmitigated chaos. Darlie can be heard sobbing hysterically, screaming for an ambulance, and shouting instructions to her husband while desperately trying to tend to her bleeding children. The operator's voice serves as a stark counterpoint to the domestic catastrophe, attempting to maintain procedural calm while coaxing details about the address, the nature of the injuries, and the presence of any potential suspects still inside the residence. This audio artifact, preserved in digital archives and courtroom exhibits alike, would subsequently be dissected by both prosecution and defense teams, each extracting profoundly different conclusions from the cadence, word choice, and emotional tone exhibited by the caller during her darkest hour. Emergency responders arrived at the Routier residence within minutes of the initial call, plunging into a chaotic environment that instantly challenged their tactical and medical training. Police officers and paramedics stepped into a scene dominated by a vast expanse of blood, overturned furniture, and the heartbreaking reality of two young boys clinging to life against insurmountable odds. Emergency medical technicians immediately initiated life-saving protocols, attempting to stabilize Devin and Damon while coordinating rapid transport to local medical facilities. Simultaneously, law enforcement officers secured the perimeter, sweeping the house for any remaining threats or hidden intruders. The exterior doors and windows were inspected for signs of forced entry, yielding the first major point of contention in the official investigation. Investigators noted that a window in the utility room or garage area had its screen cut, presenting a plausible physical pathway for an outside perpetrator. However, the immediate vicinity of this supposed point of egress lacked the secondary physical indicators typically associated with a hurried flight. There were no disrupted dust layers on the windowsill, no footprints in the flower beds beneath, and no traces of blood transferred along the projected exit route. These contradictory physical data points instantly triggered skepticism among the initial responding detectives, planting the seeds of an investigative narrative that would ultimately pivot away from the theory of a random home invasion and focus intensively on the interior dynamics of the household. As the paramedics rushed the children to the hospital, where both Devin and Damon were ultimately pronounced dead despite aggressive medical intervention, the focus of the police department shifted from a reactive rescue mission to a proactive homicide investigation. The living room on Eagle Drive, bathed in the harsh lights of crime scene technicians, began to yield a complex array of physical evidence. Blood spatter patterns covered the carpets, walls, and furniture, telling a silent, technical story of movement, struggle, and trauma that forensic experts would spend months analyzing. A bloody butcher block knife lay resting on the utility room floor, its surface smeared with biological material and fibers awaiting laboratory testing. Nearby, personal items belonging to the family, including valuable electronics, jewelry, and cash, remained undisturbed in plain sight, directly contradicting the expected behavior profile of a financially motivated burglar or intruder. The juxtaposition of extreme, targeted violence against the children alongside the complete lack of property theft created an analytical vacuum that investigators filled by turning their analytical lens inward, examining the surviving members of the household with microscopic intensity. The psychological weight of the tragedy began to intertwine with the machinery of the criminal justice system, setting into motion a sequence of events that would irrevocably alter the lives of everyone connected to the Routier family and capture the rapt, horrified attention of the American public for decades to come. The digital dashboard glowed softly in the pre-dawn darkness of June 6, 1996, casting a sterile, bluish hue across the quiet suburban living room on Eagle Drive in Rowlett, Texas. Outside, the neighborhood was wrapped in a profound, heavy silence, broken only by the occasional hum of a distant vehicle on the interstate or the rustle of summer leaves stirred by a warm midnight breeze. Inside the single-story residence, the atmosphere was ostensibly tranquil, belying the catastrophic violence that was about to rupture the fabric of an ordinary American family. Darren and Darlie Routier, along with their infant son Drake, slept in the master bedroom upstairs, while their two older boys, 6-year-old Devin and 5-year-old Damon, slumbered peacefully on sleeping bags spread across the plush carpet of the downstairs den. It was a domestic scene repeated in millions of homes across the country, a portrait of suburban routine and familial safety. Yet, within the span of a few harrowing minutes, this sanctuary would transform into a chaotic, bloody crime scene that would polarize a community, baffle investigators, and spark one of the most enduring and fiercely contested legal controversies in modern American true crime history. The transition from peaceful slumber to absolute horror occurred without warning, leaving behind a maze of conflicting interpretations, physical anomalies, and psychological trauma that decades of subsequent legal scrutiny would fail to fully untangle. The exact sequence of events that began to unfold around 2:30 in the morning remains one of the most intensely scrutinized timelines in judicial annals. According to subsequent statements and investigative reconstructions, the household was abruptly disrupted by sounds that suggested an unlawful intrusion. Darlie Routier would later maintain that she had fallen asleep on the couch downstairs before waking up to a chilling realization that an unauthorized presence was standing directly over her. In her accounts, the shadowy figure was a strange man, moving with purposeful stealth in the dim ambient light filtering through the windows. Panic, instantaneous and overwhelming, superseded sleep. Before she could fully process the threat or cry out for assistance, the confrontation escalated into physical violence. Darlie described being attacked, sustaining multiple injuries, including a severe laceration to her throat that narrowly missed her major carotid artery by millimeters, alongside defensive wounds on her arms and hands. The intruder, as her narrative unfolded, moved with ruthless efficiency toward the area where Devin and Damon were sleeping. The sleeping children, completely defenseless and trapped in the deep inertia of childhood sleep, became the primary targets of a frenzied knife assault. The weapon used in the attack was subsequently identified as a large, serrated kitchen knife retrieved from the family's own butcher block in the kitchen, a detail that would later become a cornerstone of both prosecutorial suspicion and defense debate. The sheer brutality of the stabbing inflicted catastrophic, fatal injuries on both boys, turning the carpeted den into a scene of devastating carnage. Amidst the unfolding nightmare, the psychological shockwave permeated the upper level of the home, eventually waking Darren Routier from his sleep. Disoriented by the sudden commotion and the ambient sounds of distress echoing from downstairs, Darren descended into the living area to find a horrific tableau. The immediate aftermath was characterized by sensory overload, the smell of copper and iron from spilled blood, the dim lighting, the urgent cries, and the terrifying realization that his young sons were grievously wounded. Recognizing the immediate peril and the necessity of outside intervention, Darlie reached for the telephone to summon emergency services. The resulting 911 call, placed at approximately 2:31 a.m., instantly captured the raw, unvarnished terror of the moment. The audio recording preserves Darlie's voice, oscillating between frantic pleas for help, desperate screams, and moments of acute disorientation as the dispatcher struggled to extract coherent information from a scene of unmitigated chaos. Darlie can be heard sobbing hysterically, screaming for an ambulance, and shouting instructions to her husband while desperately trying to tend to her bleeding children. The operator's voice serves as a stark counterpoint to the domestic catastrophe, attempting to maintain procedural calm while coaxing details about the address, the nature of the injuries, and the presence of any potential suspects still inside the residence. This audio artifact, preserved in digital archives and courtroom exhibits alike, would subsequently be dissected by both prosecution and defense teams, each extracting profoundly different conclusions from the cadence, word choice, and emotional tone exhibited by the caller during her darkest hour. Emergency responders arrived at the Routier residence within minutes of the initial call, plunging into a chaotic environment that instantly challenged their tactical and medical training. Police officers and paramedics stepped into a scene dominated by a vast expanse of blood, overturned furniture, and the heartbreaking reality of two young boys clinging to life against insurmountable odds. Emergency medical technicians immediately initiated life-saving protocols, attempting to stabilize Devin and Damon while coordinating rapid transport to local medical facilities. Simultaneously, law enforcement officers secured the perimeter, sweeping the house for any remaining threats or hidden intruders. The exterior doors and windows were inspected for signs of forced entry, yielding the first major point of contention in the official investigation. Investigators noted that a window in the utility room or garage area had its screen cut, presenting a plausible physical pathway for an outside perpetrator. However, the immediate vicinity of this supposed point of egress lacked the secondary physical indicators typically associated with a hurried flight. There were no disrupted dust layers on the windowsill, no footprints in the flower beds beneath, and no traces of blood transferred along the projected exit route. These contradictory physical data points instantly triggered skepticism among the initial responding detectives, planting the seeds of an investigative narrative that would ultimately pivot away from the theory of a random home invasion and focus intensively on the interior dynamics of the household. As the paramedics rushed the children to the hospital, where both Devin and Damon were ultimately pronounced dead despite aggressive medical intervention, the focus of the police department shifted from a reactive rescue mission to a proactive homicide investigation. The living room on Eagle Drive, bathed in the harsh lights of crime scene technicians, began to yield a complex array of physical evidence. Blood spatter patterns covered the carpets, walls, and furniture, telling a silent, technical story of movement, struggle, and trauma that forensic experts would spend months analyzing. A bloody butcher block knife lay resting on the utility room floor, its surface smeared with biological material and fibers awaiting laboratory testing. Nearby, personal items belonging to the family, including valuable electronics, jewelry, and cash, remained undisturbed in plain sight, directly contradicting the expected behavior profile of a financially motivated burglar or intruder. The juxtaposition of extreme, targeted violence against the children alongside the complete lack of property theft created an analytical vacuum that investigators filled by turning their analytical lens inward, examining the surviving members of the household with microscopic intensity. The psychological weight of the tragedy began to intertwine with the machinery of the criminal justice system, setting into motion a sequence of events that would irrevocably alter the lives of everyone connected to the Routier family and capture the rapt, horrified attention of the American public for decades to come. The investigative focus rapidly intensified upon Darlie Routier in the days following the tragedy, as detectives began to construct an alternative hypothesis that challenged her initial narrative of an unprovoked home invasion. Law enforcement officials noted numerous anomalies within the physical environment of the residence that fueled their growing skepticism regarding the existence of an external intruder. Chief among these points of contention was the precise condition of the primary point of entry suspected by the defense, the window leading out through the utility room into the attached garage. While the exterior window screen had indeed been cleanly sliced, investigators pointed out various physical contradictions that made a forced entry via this route highly improbable in their estimation. Specifically, the undisturbed layer of accumulated dust resting on the interior windowsill directly beneath the cut screen showed no signs of disruption, wiping, or contact disturbance that would inevitably occur if a grown adult had forcefully climbed through the narrow opening in the dead of night. Furthermore, forensic technicians examined the soil and flower beds immediately outside the garage window and discovered no footprint impressions, discarded fibers, or disturbed earth that would corroborate the hurried passage of a fleeing assailant escaping into the dark suburban surroundings. These environmental inconsistencies became foundational pillars for the prosecution's burgeoning theory that the crime scene had been deliberately staged from within the household to simulate an external attack and deflect criminal culpability away from the surviving adult occupant. Compounding the physical doubts surrounding the crime scene layout, investigators began digging deeply into the personal lives, financial standing, and behavioral patterns of both Darlie and Darren Routier in an effort to uncover a plausible motive for the unimaginable crime. Detectives learned that the family business, a computer enterprise, had been experiencing considerable monetary strains and cash flow pressures in the months leading up to the murders, casting a shadow over their outwardly affluent lifestyle in the upscale Texas suburb. The prosecution subsequently seized upon these financial difficulties to construct a narrative suggesting a desperate motive rooted in debt reduction, insurance payouts, or a desire to eliminate the daily financial burdens associated with raising young children. However, This economic hypothesis faced fierce resistance from defense attorneys, who argued that any monetary pressures the family faced were entirely manageable and fell woefully short of providing a rational or believable psychological catalyst for a mother to brutally slaughter her own offspring. Despite the lack of a clear, indisputable financial tipping point, law enforcement officials continued compiling circumstantial indicators, interpreting various everyday domestic choices through a deeply suspicious lens. Every purchase, every personal interaction, and every public statement made by the grieving parents was meticulously cataloged, analyzed, and recontextualized by investigators determined to build a comprehensive circumstantial case pointing directly toward Darlie as the sole perpetrator of the violent crime. The psychological framing of Darlie Routier underwent a dramatic and controversial public shift shortly after the murders, catalyzed by an event that would ultimately become one of the most damaging pieces of public relations imagery in modern legal history. On June 14, 1996, just days after Devin and Damon were laid to rest, family members, friends, and local residents gathered at their gravesites for a memorial candlelight vigil to mourn the tragic loss of the two young boys. Television news crews and photographers captured the deeply emotional gathering, recording Darlie as she stood before the graves adorned with flowers and commemorative items. At one point during the broadcast footage, Darlie could be seen smiling, laughing briefly, and participating in the spraying of silly string across the headstones while singing a light-hearted tune to celebrate what would have been Damon's upcoming birthday. For the grieving mother, the gesture was later explained as an unorthodox coping mechanism, an attempt to bring a moment of childlike joy to a devastatingly grim memorial for her slain sons. However, when this footage was broadcast repeatedly on national television networks, it provoked an immediate, visceral wave of public outrage and moral condemnation. Viewers across the country, conditioned to expect stereotypical displays of perpetual, disabling grief from mothers mourning murdered children, interpreted the footage as cold-blooded callousness, emotional detachment, and definitive proof of a guilty conscience. Prosecutors recognized the immense cultural weight of this public backlash and swiftly integrated the graveyard video into their core trial strategy, transforming a private moment of grief management into a potent piece of rhetorical theater designed to convince a future jury of the defendant's alleged sociopathic nature. As the pre-trial maneuvers progressed through the legal system, the physical injuries sustained by Darlie herself became the subject of intense, highly technical medical debates between opposing expert witnesses. On the night of the murders, medical records confirmed that Darlie had suffered multiple lacerations, most notably a deep, horizontal slash across her neck that doctors later testified came remarkably close to severing her major carotid artery. The defense presented this near-fatal wound as definitive proof of a vicious struggle against an armed intruder who had overpowered her and attempted to silence her permanently. Conversely, the state's medical experts and forensic pathologists advanced a vastly different interpretation, arguing that the trajectory, depth, and lack of hesitation marks on the neck wound were entirely consistent with self-inflicted trauma designed to mimic a defensive struggle and provide a plausible alibi for her survival. Medical testimony dissected the exact angles of the blade entry, the tension of the skin, and the physiological mechanics required to inflict such an injury upon oneself versus an external attacker. This battle of the medical experts transformed the courtroom into an anatomical arena where every millimeter of scar tissue, every drop of blood, and every pattern of bruising was subjected to microscopic scrutiny by opposing legal teams attempting to validate their respective narratives. The inability of the medical community to reach a universal consensus regarding the origin of Darlie's wounds left the jury to navigate a labyrinth of conflicting scientific interpretations, adding another layer of profound ambiguity to an already complex evidentiary puzzle. The accumulation of these divergent threads, ranging from disputed physical entry points and financial speculations to inflammatory media footage and contradictory medical evaluations, culminated in a fiercely polarized legal landscape well before the gavel fell to open the formal trial proceedings. The community of Rowlett and the broader legal apparatus in Texas were locked in a state of suspended animation, acutely aware that the upcoming trial would not merely adjudicate the tragic deaths of two innocent children, but would also test the boundaries of circumstantial evidence, media influence, and forensic interpretation. Every piece of physical evidence recovered from the carpeted den, every drop of blood analyzed by state laboratories, and every emotional expression captured on audio or video was weighed, contested, and re-evaluated in the shadow of public scrutiny. The stage was thus relentlessly set for a courtroom confrontation of historic proportions, where the fundamental question of maternal innocence versus calculated murder would be placed squarely in the hands of a jury tasked with separating verifiable fact from emotional bias, paving the way for one of the most controversial judicial verdicts in the annals of American criminal jurisprudence. The formal trial of Darlie Routier commenced in early 1997, shifting the judicial proceedings from the local jurisdiction of Rowlett to the quiet courtroom in Kerrville, Texas, a change of venue granted by the presiding judge to mitigate the overwhelming waves of pretrial publicity and community prejudice that had saturated the Dallas area. From the opening statements delivered by the state and the defense, the courtroom was charged with palpable tension, serving as the physical epicenter for a legal battle that commanded national media attention and divided public opinion down the middle. The prosecution, led by a formidable team of district attorneys, embarked on a deliberate strategy designed to dismantle Darlie's narrative piece by piece, weaving together a complex web of circumstantial indicators, forensic analyses, and behavioral interpretations to paint a picture of calculated premeditation. They argued that the crime scene was an elaborate, carefully constructed charade orchestrated by a desperate woman whose lifestyle demands had outpaced her financial reality and who viewed her young children not as cherished treasures, but as impediments to her social ambitions and financial freedom. Throughout the presentation of their case, state prosecutors introduced hundreds of exhibits, photographs of the blood-soaked living room, and hours of audio and video recordings, systematically attempting to establish that no external intruder ever crossed the threshold of the Routier home on that fateful June night. Central to the prosecution's evidentiary presentation was the meticulous dissection of the physical and biological evidence recovered from the crime scene, delivered through a parade of expert witnesses, forensic scientists, and crime scene reconstructionists. State experts walked the jury through intricate blood spatter analyses, utilizing charts, diagrams, and laser trajectories to demonstrate that the blood stains found on Darlie's nightshirt and person were fundamentally inconsistent with her claim of having fought off a crazed, knife-wielding intruder in the middle of a dark room. Instead, the prosecution's forensic specialists argued that the high-velocity impact spatter and transfer patterns on her clothing suggested she was standing stationary or moving in a deliberate manner while wielding the weapon herself, thereby refuting her account of a chaotic, defensive struggle. The bloody butcher block knife recovered from the utility room floor was subjected to extensive chemical and biological testing, with state technicians testifying about fingerprints, fibers, and trace evidence that supposedly linked the weapon directly to the kitchen counter and, by extension, to Darlie's immediate control. Every physical detail, from the position of the overturned couch cushions to the tiny droplets of blood discovered on the handle of the utility room door, was reinterpreted by the state to reinforce a singular, unyielding conclusion that the mother of the victims was the sole architect of the carnage that transpired in the early morning hours of June 6, 1996. In stark contrast to the state's aggressive presentation, the defense team, spearheaded by experienced criminal defense attorneys, mounted a vigorous counteroffensive aimed at exposing the critical gaps, speculative leaps, and inherent biases underpinning the prosecution's theory of guilt. The defense argued passionately that the state had failed to produce a single shred of direct physical evidence, such as a confession, a confirmed eyewitness, or unambiguous DNA matching the defendant to the fatal wounds, that conclusively proved Darlie had harmed her children. They systematically challenged the credibility and methodology of the state's forensic experts, presenting their own independent crime scene reconstructionists and medical authorities who offered alternative interpretations of the blood spatter patterns and physical trauma. The defense emphasized the sheer physical impossibility of a mother willingly inflicting a near-fatal, 4-inch slash across her own throat, bringing in renowned forensic pathologists to testify that the proximity of the wound to the carotid artery represented an extraordinarily high, life-threatening gamble that no rational person would intentionally take merely to stage a fake alibi. Furthermore, the defense attorneys highlighted the superficial and hurried nature of the initial police investigation, asserting that law enforcement officials had exhibited severe tunnel vision from the very first moments at the scene, aggressively discounting alternative suspects, ignoring potential external leads, and prematurely closing their minds to the terrifying possibility of a genuine prowler roaming the suburban neighborhood. As the weeks-long trial progressed into its most intense phases, the emotional and psychological warfare waged by both legal teams reached a fever pitch, with the introduction of controversial media artifacts playing a pivotal role in shaping the atmosphere of the courtroom. The prosecution successfully introduced the infamous videotape of the gravesite memorial service, wherein Darlie and her family members were captured smiling, laughing, and spraying silly string across Devin and Damon's headstones. The presentation of this footage to the jury was executed with dramatic precision, designed to provoke the same visceral wave of moral outrage and emotional alienation that had swept across television screens nationwide when the clip was originally broadcast. The district attorneys argued that this display of levity mere days after burying her children was definitive, unvarnished proof of a cold, callous, and sociopathic personality completely devoid of genuine maternal grief. The defense vehemently objected to the admission of the video, arguing that it constituted highly prejudicial, out-of-context character assassination designed solely to inflame the passions and biases of the jurors rather than provide substantive evidence regarding the events of the crime itself. Despite these impassioned legal objections, the judge allowed the footage into evidence, ensuring that the haunting image of the silly string celebration would remain etched in the collective consciousness of the jury room as they prepared to weigh the ultimate fate of the accused woman. The culmination of the trial arrived with the closing arguments, where both sides made their final, impassioned appeals to the 12 jurors tasked with deciding whether Darlie Routier was a tragic survivor of a horrific home invasion or a ruthless, calculating murderer who extinguished the lives of her own sons. The prosecution reiterated their comprehensive narrative, tying together the disputed window screen, the financial strains, the contested medical wounds, the damning 911 audio cadence, and the emotional detachment visible in the gravesite video to forge an unyielding chain of circumstantial certainty. The defense countered with a final, desperate plea for logical rigor and adherence to the bedrock principle of reasonable doubt, reminding the jury that a person's life cannot and must not be forfeited based on speculation, public prejudice, and flawed police work. As the jury retired to the deliberation room to sift through mountains of conflicting exhibits, hours of conflicting testimony, and a labyrinth of emotional landmines, the courtroom and the entire community held their collective breath, acutely aware that the impending verdict would reverberate far beyond the borders of Texas, leaving an indelible scar on the landscape of American legal history and setting the stage for decades of unyielding controversy, legal appeals, and profound moral debate surrounding the administration of justice. The jury deliberations in the trial of Darlie Routier stretched across multiple days of intense, agonizing debate, reflecting the profound complexity and emotional turbulence of the evidence presented during the weeks of courtroom testimony. As the jurors sequestered themselves behind closed doors, they were tasked with the immense responsibility of navigating a labyrinth of conflicting forensic interpretations, emotionally charged video exhibits, and radically opposing narratives regarding what truly transpired inside the suburban home on that fateful June night. Outside the courthouse, media vans crowded the streets, and crowds of onlookers waited anxiously for a sign, acutely aware that the final decision would echo powerfully throughout the legal system and deeply divide public opinion. Within the deliberation room, the discussions were reportedly fierce as individual jurors weighed the state's intricate circumstantial web against the defense's warnings regarding reasonable doubt and investigative tunnel vision. Every single piece of physical evidence, from the microscopic blood spatter patterns on the nightshirt to the disputed cut on the window screen, was re-examined under the harsh light of collective scrutiny. Ultimately, the jury reached a consensus that brought the dramatic trial phase to a definitive halt, paving the way for a sentencing decision that would seal the legal fate of the accused mother and permanently cement the case into the annals of American true crime history. On February 4th, 1997, the jury returned its official verdict, finding Darlie Routier guilty of capital murder in connection with the tragic death of her 5-year-old son, Damon Routier. The announcement of the verdict sent a palpable shockwave through the courtroom, drawing sharp gasps from family members and observers alike as the realization of the legal outcome set in. Following the conviction, the proceedings immediately transitioned into the sentencing phase, where the same jury was required to determine whether the crime warranted the ultimate punishment provided by Texas law. The prosecution presented additional arguments focusing on the heinous nature of the crime, the vulnerability of the young victims, and the alleged lack of remorse demonstrated by the defendant, utilizing these factors to advocate forcefully for the death penalty. Conversely, the defense team pleaded for mercy and life imprisonment, emphasizing Darlie's lack of prior criminal history and the enduring trauma of losing 2 children. After further deliberation, the jury rendered its final sentence, recommending that Darlie receive the death penalty by lethal injection. The presiding judge formally accepted the jury's recommendation, officially sentencing Darlie Routier to death and securing her transfer to the state's prison system to await the lengthy appeals process that typically follows such a severe judicial outcome. Following her formal condemnation to death row, Darlie Routier was transported to the Mountain View Unit, later renamed the Patrick O'Daniel Unit, located in Gatesville, Texas, where female inmates condemned to capital punishment are housed. This transition marked the beginning of a starkly different chapter in her existence, characterized by stringent security measures, isolation from mainstream prison populations, and the repetitive, regimented routine of maximum security incarceration. Inside her cell, Darlie consistently maintained her innocence, steadfastly asserting that she had nothing to do with the horrific murders of her children and that the true perpetrator remained unidentified and uncaptured. Despite the physical constraints of her environment, she and her supporters immediately began laying the groundwork for a comprehensive appeals strategy, enlisting new legal counsel to challenge the validity of the original conviction. This appellate campaign focused heavily on identifying alleged errors made during the trial, pointing to ineffective assistance of counsel, questionable forensic methodologies utilized by state experts, and the failure of initial investigators to thoroughly pursue alternative suspects. The legal battleground thus shifted from the courtroom jury box to the complex appellate courts of Texas and the federal judiciary, where the fight for a new trial or an overturned sentence would span decades of legal motions, briefs, and evidentiary hearings. As the years progressed into the subsequent decades, the legal team representing Darlie pursued numerous avenues for post-conviction relief, introducing fresh perspectives and modern technological capabilities that had not been available during the 1997 trial. One of the most significant legal turning points occurred when her attorneys successfully petitioned the courts under Texas statutory provisions for advanced DNA testing on various biological pieces of evidence recovered from the original crime scene. These items included the bloody nightshirt, the towel found near the scene, and hairs collected from the physical surroundings, all of which held the potential to either conclusively tie Darlie to the physical assault or reveal the genetic profile of an unknown external contributor. The scientific testing of these items sparked intense interest from both legal analysts and true crime researchers, who viewed the DNA analysis as a critical test of the original verdict's integrity. While the laboratory results and subsequent legal motions generated endless debates regarding trace profiles and contamination risks, the ongoing appeals underscored the enduring complexity of the case, ensuring that the questions surrounding the tragic events on Eagle Drive would remain part of the public consciousness and legal discourse for generations to come. The case of Darlie Routier continues to occupy a uniquely polarizing and haunting space in the cultural and legal landscape of the United States, standing as a stark reminder of the profound challenges inherent in prosecuting complex domestic homicide investigations. On one side, proponents of the original verdict argue that the cumulative weight of the circumstantial evidence, the physical impossibility of an unknown intruder leaving the scene untouched, and the peculiar behavioral indicators presented during the trial conclusively point to Darlie's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. On the other side, an equally passionate coalition of defense advocates, forensic scientists, and investigative journalists contend that the conviction was the product of a deeply flawed investigation, tunnel vision, and prejudicial media framing that overshadowed the actual search for objective truth. This enduring divide ensures that whenever the name Darlie Routier is invoked, it revives fierce debates concerning the reliability of forensic science, the impact of public perception on judicial outcomes, and the ultimate irreversibility of the death penalty. Whether viewed as a calculating criminal brought to justice or a tragic survivor wrongfully condemned by a flawed system, the legacy of the Rowlett tragedy remains an unhealed wound in the history of American jurisprudence, compelling continuous re-examination of the delicate balance between accusation, evidence, and absolute truth. The legal landscape surrounding Darlie Routier shifted dramatically as the 21st century progressed, bringing new rounds of post-conviction motions, forensic re-examinations, and intense public scrutiny regarding the integrity of her original trial. Throughout years of confinement on Texas death row, Darlie maintained her steadfast declaration of innocence, insisting that the judicial system had tragically condemned an aggrieved mother while allowing the actual perpetrator of the horrific crimes to elude justice. Her legal representation expanded to include specialized attorneys and forensic experts dedicated to unraveling the complex web of circumstantial evidence that had sealed her fate back in 1997. This appellate phase was characterized by a meticulous, microscopic review of every trial transcript, police report, and laboratory exhibit, with a primary objective of identifying constitutional violations, prosecutorial overreach, and technological advancements that could justify an overturning of the capital conviction. The legal battles spanned multiple tiers of the state and federal court systems, reflecting the high-stakes, polarized nature of a case that continued to command the attention of legal scholars, investigative journalists, and true crime advocates worldwide who remained deeply divided over the ultimate question of her culpability. A major focal point of the post-conviction strategy involved leveraging modern forensic DNA testing technologies that had advanced exponentially since the mid-1990s. Under Texas statutes allowing for post-conviction DNA testing, Darlie's defense team filed formal motions seeking to subject various physical items recovered from the crime scene to advanced biological analysis. These items included the bloody nightshirt she wore on the night of the murders, the socks found near the residence, hairs discovered on the physical evidence, and the bloodstains scattered across the living room carpet. The overarching goal of these sophisticated tests was to detect any foreign DNA profiles that did not belong to members of the Routier household, thereby providing tangible scientific support for the long-standing claim that an unknown intruder had indeed been present inside the home. The prosecution and state forensic laboratories monitored these motions closely, leading to prolonged legal arguments over sample degradation, chain of custody, and the precise interpretation of complex touch DNA profiles. While the results of these scientific tests generated extensive debate among independent geneticists and legal commentators, they served to keep the case alive in the appellate courts, ensuring that the physical evidence remained a battleground for competing interpretations of truth and justice. Parallel to the scientific and legal maneuverings within the courtroom, the cultural and public perception of the Darlie Routier case underwent a profound evolution over the decades following her conviction. Documentaries, investigative podcasts, and deeply researched true crime books revisited the chilling events of June 6, 1996, introducing the intricate details of the prosecution and defense arguments to entirely new generations of audiences. These media explorations often scrutinized the role that pretrial publicity, emotional courtroom theatrics, and the infamous gravesite silly string video played in shaping the collective mindset of the original jury. Critics of the verdict argued that Darlie had been unfairly tried in the court of public opinion long before the jury ever stepped foot into the box, burdened by societal expectations of how a grieving mother should outwardly express her trauma and psychological distress. Conversely, supporters of the state's case pointed to the sheer accumulation of physical and circumstantial anomalies, maintaining that no outside intruder could have orchestrated such a targeted, violent attack while leaving behind no verifiable footprint, trace, or exit path. This ongoing cultural debate ensured that the tragedy on Eagle Drive transcended its legal boundaries, becoming a permanent case study in university classrooms and legal seminars examining the delicate interplay between emotion, forensic science, and the administration of capital punishment. The question of why Darlie Routier was never prosecuted for the death of her younger son, Devin Routier, remained a significant and frequently misunderstood aspect of the case's legal history. While Damon Routier was the sole subject of the 1997 capital murder indictment and subsequent death sentence, the parallel charges involving Devin were effectively set aside by prosecutors following the conclusion of the first trial. Under Texas criminal procedure, once a defendant has been tried, convicted, and sentenced to the maximum penalty of death for one count of capital murder arising out of a multi-victim event, the state frequently chooses not to expend additional public resources and court time on secondary capital trials for the other victims, as the ultimate legal punishment has already been secured. However, these untried charges remained formally open on the books as a matter of legal record, representing an unresolved judicial chapter that underscored the complex mechanics of multi-count prosecutions. Legal analysts frequently highlighted this specific procedural decision when discussing the strategic choices made by district attorneys during high-profile capital cases, noting how the state optimized its evidentiary resources to achieve a decisive conviction without encumbering the jury with redundant or overlapping indictments that could complicate the primary path toward a death sentence. As the years advanced toward the current decade, the legal status of Darlie Routier remained defined by a holding pattern of perpetual appeals, federal habeas corpus petitions, and ongoing reviews of newly discovered or retested evidence. Her attorneys continued to press forward with motions aimed at securing an evidentiary hearing or a new trial, arguing that cumulative constitutional errors, changes in forensic standards, and unexamined biological data warranted a fresh judicial review of the case. Meanwhile, Darlie continued her life inside the maximum security confines of the women's prison unit in Gatesville, communicating periodically with supporters and maintaining her innocence through various advocacy platforms. The case stands as one of the most enduring, fiercely debated chapters in modern American jurisprudence, capturing the profound complexities inherent in capital litigation where absolute certainty remains perpetually elusive. Whether evaluated through the prism of meticulous forensic science, rigorous appellate advocacy, or the haunting memory of a quiet suburban night shattered by unimaginable violence, the legacy of Darlie Routier continues to challenge investigators, legal experts, and society at large to critically examine the fragile balance between accusation, evidence, and the pursuit of justice in the modern world. The physical evidence in the tragic case of Darlie Routier has remained the absolute focal point of intense legal and forensic scrutiny for nearly 3 decades. When investigators first crossed the threshold of the home on Eagle Drive, they were immediately confronted with a complex, highly bloody environment that defied simple explanation. The initial assessment of the crime scene yielded numerous biological and physical artifacts that would eventually form the foundational pillars of the state prosecution against the surviving mother. However, the subsequent interpretations of these very same artifacts by defense experts would create a profound, enduring controversy regarding the true sequence of events that unfolded in the early morning hours. Law enforcement technicians systematically cataloged every drop of blood, every displaced item, and every microscopic fiber found within the living room and adjacent utility areas. This exhaustive collection process was driven by the urgent need to establish a definitive narrative of the crime. The resulting forensic database became a battleground of competing scientific theories, with opposing experts drawing radically different conclusions from the exact same physical elements. The sheer volume of material collected guaranteed that the forensic debate would persist through multiple generations of appellate review and technological advancement. Central to the physical evidence collected at the scene was the primary murder weapon, a large serrated kitchen knife discovered resting prominently on the floor of the utility room. Investigators quickly traced this blade back to the wooden butcher block situated on the kitchen counter of the Routier household, instantly raising critical questions about the origin and identity of the perpetrator. Forensic technicians subjected the knife to rigorous laboratory analysis, searching for fingerprints, biological fluids, and trace fibers that could definitively link the weapon to a specific individual. The state argued that the presence of the family knife strongly indicated an inside job, theorizing that a genuine external intruder would have brought their own weapon rather than relying on a weapon of opportunity found within the dark residence. Furthermore, investigators discovered trace amounts of a unique material mixed with the blood on the blade, which they later matched to the fiberglass composition of the cut window screen. This critical microscopic discovery allowed the prosecution to construct a specific timeline suggesting that the knife was used to cut the screen from the inside, deliberately staging an artificial point of entry to mislead the initial responding police officers and emergency medical personnel. The condition of the window screen located in the utility room garage constituted another deeply contested segment of the physical evidence paradigm. Darlie Routier consistently maintained that this particular window served as the escape route for the unknown assailant who had attacked her and murdered her children. However, crime scene investigators meticulously documented several physical anomalies that completely contradicted the theory of a frantic, hurried exit by an adult male intruder. The thick layer of accumulated dust resting gently on the interior windowsill directly beneath the severed screen appeared entirely undisturbed, showing no signs of the physical contact or displacement that would inevitably occur during a forced egress. Additionally, the soil and mulch in the flower beds located immediately outside the window bore no identifiable footprint impressions, broken plants, or transferred blood drops. The prosecution seized upon these stark environmental inconsistencies to aggressively argue that the compromised screen was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated theatrical prop, sliced open from the inside of the house to create a false trail. Defense attorneys vigorously challenged this assertion, pointing out that initial law enforcement personnel failed to adequately secure the exterior perimeter, potentially allowing crucial trace evidence of the intruder to be destroyed. A critical discovery occurred several days after the murders when investigators located a bloody sock discarded in an alleyway approximately 75 yards away from the Routier residence. This seemingly innocuous item of clothing quickly transformed into a vital forensic artifact, as subsequent laboratory testing confirmed that the blood saturating the fabric belonged exclusively to the victims. For the defense team, the discovery of the sock in the distant alleyway represented the ultimate vindication of their client, providing tangible, irrefutable proof that a perpetrator had fled the immediate confines of the household carrying physical traces of the crime. They argued that it was completely illogical and physically impossible for a severely wounded mother to sprint down the alley, discard the sock, and sprint back to the house all within the incredibly narrow time frame surrounding the emergency call. Conversely, the prosecution offered a radically different interpretation of the discarded garment, theorizing that Darlie had deliberately planted the bloody sock in the alleyway prior to inflicting the severe lacerations upon her own throat. This specific dispute over the sock exemplifies the pervasive duality of the physical evidence in the case, where every single artifact could be weaponized by opposing legal counsel seamlessly. The most technically complex aspect of the physical evidence involved the exhaustive analysis of the blood spatter patterns coating the oversized nightshirt worn by Darlie Routier during the attack. Forensic experts employed by the state dedicated countless hours to mapping the exact size, shape, and distribution of the blood droplets, utilizing these microscopic details to reconstruct the physical dynamics of the violent encounter. The prosecution experts testified that the specific mixture of cast-off patterns and high-velocity impact spatter found on the garment was fundamentally inconsistent with her personal narrative of defensive struggle. Instead, they forcefully argued that the intricate blood distribution clearly indicated that the wearer of the shirt was standing relatively still and actively wielding the knife as it struck the victims. This devastating scientific testimony formed the absolute core of the state case, providing an objective, mathematical refutation of the defendant and her emotional claims of innocence. The defense countered by presenting their own distinguished forensic pathologists, who fiercely contested the reliability of the state testing methods and proposed alternative mechanical interpretations for the blood transfer. They maintained that the chaotic, dynamic nature of a violent, close-quarter struggle could produce exactly identical observed spatter patterns. Beyond the prominently featured items like the knife and the nightshirt, The crime scene yielded numerous microscopic trace elements that have continued to fuel passionate legal debates for decades. Forensic technicians conducted extensive vacuum sweepings of the living room carpet, recovering an array of unidentified hairs, foreign fibers, and ambiguous biological materials that initially defied simple categorization. Among these microscopic discoveries was a single, unidentified blonde hair found clutched in the hand of one of the young victims, a detail that the defense continuously highlighted as definitive evidence of an unknown external participant. Furthermore, investigators recovered a bloody fingerprint from the glass surface of the coffee table situated directly adjacent to the immediate attack zone, a print that notably did not match any documented member of the household or the initial responding personnel. While the prosecution aggressively minimized the significance of these anomalous trace findings, attributing them to simple environmental contamination or pre-existing household debris, the defense heavily relied upon them to cultivate a profound sense of reasonable doubt. These microscopic fragments of unknown origin serve as enduring reminders of the inherent imperfections and persistent uncertainties that constantly plague even the most modern domestic crime scenes thoroughly processed today. The relentless evolution of forensic technology has ensured that the physical evidence collected in the summer of 1996 remains actively contested in the modern appellate arena. Armed with sophisticated genomic mapping techniques that were entirely unavailable during the original trial, appellate attorneys have successfully petitioned the courts to subject the preserved biological artifacts to advanced touch DNA screening. These modern laboratory procedures are specifically designed to isolate and amplify microscopic cellular deposits left behind through brief physical contact, offering the tantalizing possibility of finally identifying the elusive external intruder. The ongoing biological testing encompasses key evidentiary items, including the severed window screen, the discarded alleyway sock, and the various unidentified hairs recovered from the immediate vicinity of the sleeping children. Every new forensic report generated by these advanced laboratories is instantly subjected to intense judicial scrutiny, as both the prosecution and defense meticulously analyze the complex genetic data for any microscopic advantage. The enduring legal battle over these cellular fragments underscores the profound, unyielding determination of both factions to establish absolute historical truth, ensuring that the physical evidence in the Darlie Routier case will continue to be the definitive battleground for American criminal justice for the foreseeable future. The ongoing evolution of the Darlie Routier case into the current decade highlights the profound complexities, unyielding controversies, and systemic hurdles inherent in modern American capital post-conviction litigation. As the legal battles continue to navigate the intricate labyrinth of state and federal appellate courts, the core arguments presented by both the defense and the prosecution have become deeply entrenched, reflecting decades of accumulated legal briefs, forensic re-examinations, and shifting public perceptions. For the dedicated network of attorneys and advocates supporting Darlie, the primary focus remains anchored in uncovering procedural errors, challenging the validity of outdated forensic methodologies, and championing the necessity of comprehensive, unhindered biological testing that could finally provide an objective, scientifically definitive answer to the decades-old mysteries of the Eagle Drive residents. They argue that justice cannot be considered final or complete so long as credible avenues of scientific inquiry remain contested or unfulfilled, emphasizing that the irrevocable nature of the death penalty demands an uncompromising standard of absolute certainty before a human life is permanently extinguished by the state. On the other side of the legal divide, representatives of the prosecution and state authorities maintain an unwavering stance regarding the absolute integrity of the original 1997 verdict, asserting that the comprehensive web of circumstantial evidence, the meticulously analyzed blood spatter patterns, the implausibility of an untraceable external intruder, and the cumulative weight of the trial record established guilt far beyond any reasonable doubt. They contend that the endless cycle of appeals represents a predictable procedural maneuvering designed to delay the execution of a lawfully imposed sentence for a heinous crime, pointing to the finality upheld by multiple appellate courts over the course of nearly 30 years as a testament to the durability and correctness of the original judicial outcome. This stark, unyielding polarization ensures that every single motion filed, every forensic report published, and every judicial ruling handed down continues to ignite fierce public debate and media interest, transforming the Routier case into a permanent fixture in the study of criminal jurisprudence. Within the maximum security confines of the Patrick O'Daniel unit in Gatesville, Texas, Darlie Routier's daily existence reflects the stark, monotonous reality of life on women's death row, a grim environment defined by rigid institutional routines, extreme isolation from the general prison population, and the psychological weight of an indefinite future hanging in the balance. Despite the profound hardships of her confinement, she has consistently maintained active communication with her legal team and supporters, steadfastly refusing to alter her narrative of innocence regarding the tragic events of June 6, 1996. Her supporters often emphasize her resilience and psychological endurance in the face of insurmountable odds, portraying her as a wrongfully condemned mother who has spent decades enduring the ultimate nightmare of losing her two young sons only to be stripped of her freedom and accused of their murders. Conversely, critics and opponents view her enduring incarceration not as a tragic miscarriage of justice, but as the appropriate, necessary consequence for a heinous act of premeditated violence, arguing that the passage of time does not diminish the gravity of the crimes committed against Devin and Damon Routier. This intense human element, the stark contrast between the image of a grieving mother and that of a convicted child killer, continues to captivate the collective imagination of the public, fueling endless true crime discussions, analytical podcasts, and investigative documentaries that dissect every nuance of her personality, her marriage, and her behavior before and after the tragedy. The psychological impact of the case extends far beyond the direct participants, leaving an indelible emotional scar on the local community of Rowlett, Texas, where the horrors of that pre-dawn summer night still linger in the collective memory as a watershed moment of suburban trauma and institutional disbelief. The broader cultural and educational legacy of the Darlie Routier trial extends deep into university classrooms, law school seminars, and forensic training programs across the United States, where it serves as a quintessential case study examining the fragile intersection of emotion, media influence, and scientific evidence in criminal trials. Legal scholars frequently utilize the case to illustrate the profound dangers of pretrial publicity and the ways in which emotional artifacts, such as the infamous gravesite silly string video, can unconsciously bias a jury, effectively overshadowing complex forensic data and eroding the presumption of innocence. The trial is dissected for its lessons on investigative tunnel vision, highlighting how initial police impressions can harden into rigid narratives that lead investigators to selectively interpret physical evidence while ignoring alternative hypotheses or external leads. Furthermore, forensic scientists frequently analyze the blood spatter testimony and medical arguments presented during the 1997 proceedings to demonstrate both the advancements and the limitations of forensic interpretation, noting how conflicting expert testimonies can turn a courtroom into an ideological battleground rather than a forum for objective scientific truth. These academic explorations ensure that the case remains a vital touchstone for ongoing discussions regarding criminal justice reform, the reliability of circumstantial evidence, and the ethical responsibilities of prosecutors and defense attorneys alike in high-stakes capital litigation. As the legal proceedings continue to unfold in the modern era, the shadow of the unresolved charges concerning the death of Devin Routier remains a fascinating and legally unique footnote in the broader narrative of the case. While Darlie was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death exclusively for the murder of Damon Routier, the parallel capital indictment for Devin was formally set aside by prosecutors under standard Texas legal procedures once the maximum penalty had been secured. This procedural reality means that even if a miraculous appellate victory, a vacated sentence, or a newly granted retrial were to materialize in the future, the state retains the legal mechanism to pursue a secondary prosecution regarding Devin's death, ensuring that the legal entanglements surrounding the family would not simply evaporate with a single judicial ruling. This intricate web of charges, appeals, DNA petitions, and constitutional arguments creates a dense, multi-layered legal puzzle that few contemporary cases can match in sheer scope and persistence. Legal experts continuously monitor the docket for any sign of a breakthrough, whether through groundbreaking advancements in touch DNA technology, the discovery of previously unexamined physical evidence, or a landmark ruling from a federal appellate court willing to intervene in a long-settled capital conviction. Until such a definitive turning point occurs, the case remains locked in its familiar, agonizing rhythm of legal filings and judicial reviews, a perpetual testament to the complexities of seeking absolute justice within an imperfect human institution. Ultimately, the story of Darlie Routier stands as one of the most haunting, intensely scrutinized, and deeply polarizing chapters in the history of American true crime, capturing the absolute fragility of human existence and the devastating permanence of sudden, catastrophic loss. Whether viewed through the lens of unwavering defense advocacy, unyielding prosecutorial conviction, or objective academic analysis, the events of June 6, 1996, and their subsequent judicial fallout challenge everyone who encounters them to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of guilt, the fallibility of memory, the power of media framing, and the ultimate morality of capital punishment. The names Devin, Damon, and Darlie Routier are permanently etched into the cultural landscape of the nation, serving as a solemn reminder of a quiet suburban home shattered forever by violence, and leaving behind a legacy of unresolved questions that will continue to echo across generations of legal scholars, investigators, and true crime observers for years to come. The ongoing chapter of the Darlie Routier legal saga unfolds against a backdrop of continuous technological advancement and relentless legal persistence, marking a distinct phase in a decades-long struggle for post-conviction transparency. As the judicial calendar progresses through the modern era, the collective focus of defense attorneys, forensic investigators, and legal observers remains firmly fixed on the meticulous re-examination of physical evidence utilizing state-of-the-art scientific methodologies that were completely unavailable during the original 1997 trial proceedings. The pursuit of advanced DNA testing under statutory provisions has transformed from a speculative legal maneuver into a sophisticated, highly targeted effort to isolate microtraces of biological material that could potentially rewrite the narrative of that tragic June night. Every microscopic fiber, every stained textile, and every biological sample preserved within the state's secure evidence vaults is subjected to rigorous legal scrutiny, reflecting an era where modern science is increasingly called upon to verify or challenge historical verdicts in capital cases. This relentless scientific inquiry ensures that the case is not merely locked in the amber of 1990s courtroom arguments, but is instead an active, evolving legal battleground where the boundaries of forensic technology are continually tested against the rigid constraints of post-conviction procedural rules and appellate statutes. Within the sterile confines of the Patrick O'Daniel unit in Gatesville, Texas, Darlie Routier's enduring presence on death row serves as a poignant symbol of the protracted, emotionally draining nature of long-term capital punishment litigation in the United States. Having spent nearly 30 years behind maximum security bars, she inhabits a reality defined by profound isolation, rigid institutional routines, and the psychological weight of an indefinite future where every day mirrors the last. Despite the immense hardships of her environment, Darlie continues to maintain steady communication with her dedicated network of appellate counsel and supporters, persistently upholding her absolute denial of involvement in the murders of her young sons, Devin and Damon. Her steadfast proclamation of innocence over the course of 3 decades has fostered a deeply devoted community of true crime advocates and legal reformers who view her continued incarceration as a profound miscarriage of justice, pointing to her unwavering resilience as evidence of a wrongfully condemned mother fighting against an insurmountable institutional tide. Conversely, critics and proponents of the original verdict maintain their resolute stance that the passage of time does not diminish the gravity or correctness of the jury's 1997 decision, arguing that the accumulated weight of the state's circumstantial evidence and the inherent implausibility of an untraceable external intruder fully justify her ongoing confinement. This deep emotional and ideological chasm between opposing factions ensures that every development, no matter how small, continues to ignite fierce public debate and media engagement across national platforms. The broader institutional and academic footprint of the Darlie Routier trial remains firmly embedded in university curriculums, law school seminars, and forensic training academies across the nation, where it is frequently analyzed as a textbook illustration of the complex interplay between media influence, emotional theater, and scientific interpretation in high-stakes criminal prosecutions. Legal scholars routinely examine the case to demonstrate the profound hazards associated with intense pretrial publicity and the ways in which inflammatory media artifacts, most notably the infamous gravesite silly string video, can unconsciously bias a jury, effectively overshadowing objective forensic data and undermining the foundational presumption of innocence. The proceedings are meticulously deconstructed to highlight the dangers of investigative tunnel vision, illustrating how initial law enforcement impressions can solidify into rigid prosecutorial narratives that lead investigators to selectively interpret physical evidence while prematurely dismissing alternative hypotheses or external leads. Furthermore, forensic pathologists and blood spatter analysts continue to debate the medical and ballistic testimonies presented during the trial, using the case to explore both the capabilities and the inherent limitations of forensic reconstruction when applied to chaotic, multi-victim domestic crime scenes. These rigorous academic explorations guarantee that the tragedy on Eagle Drive will endure as a vital reference point for ongoing discussions concerning criminal justice reform, the reliability of circumstantial evidence, and the stringent ethical duties incumbent upon all officers of the court in capital litigation. As the legal proceedings continue to wind their way through the intricate labyrinth of federal habeas corpus petitions and state appellate motions, the unresolved legal status of the charges concerning the death of Devin Routier remains a fascinating, unique procedural footnote in the annals of Texas jurisprudence. While Darlie was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death exclusively for the capital murder of Damon Routier, the parallel indictment involving Devin was formally set aside by prosecutors under standard legal strategy once the maximum penalty of death had been secured for the household tragedy. This calculated procedural decision means that even in the highly hypothetical event of a miraculous appellate victory, a vacated conviction, or a newly granted retrial in the modern era, the state retains the full legal authority to initiate a secondary prosecution regarding Devin's death, ensuring that the legal entanglements surrounding the family would not simply dissolve with a single favorable judicial ruling. This dense, multi-layered web of charges, post-conviction DNA petitions, and constitutional claims creates a uniquely complicated legal puzzle that few contemporary cases can match in sheer scope, emotional resonance, and procedural persistence. Legal analysts and appellate attorneys continuously monitor the docket for any sign of an unprecedented breakthrough, whether through groundbreaking advancements in touch DNA technology, the discovery of previously unexamined physical evidence, or a landmark ruling from a federal appellate court willing to intervene in a long-settled capital conviction. Until such a definitive turning point materializes, the case remains locked in its familiar, agonizing rhythm of legal filings, briefs, and judicial reviews, standing as a perpetual testament to the immense difficulties of balancing finality, justice, and absolute truth within an imperfect human legal system. Ultimately, the complex legacy of the Darlie Routier case resonates deeply within the cultural and legal fabric of the United States, serving as a haunting reminder of the absolute fragility of human existence and the devastating permanence of sudden, catastrophic loss. Whether evaluated through the prism of unwavering defense advocacy, unyielding prosecutorial conviction, or objective academic analysis, the events of June 6, 1996, and their subsequent judicial fallout challenge everyone who encounters them to confront uncomfortable questions regarding the nature of guilt, the fallibility of human memory, the immense power of media framing, and the ultimate morality of capital punishment. The names Devin, Damon, and Darlie Routier are permanently etched into the historical landscape of the nation, acting as a solemn reminder of a quiet suburban home shattered forever by inexplicable violence, and leaving behind a vast repository of unresolved questions that will continue to echo across generations of legal scholars, investigators, and true crime observers for years to come. The concluding trajectory of the Darlie Routier legal saga as it stands within the contemporary legal landscape reflects a deeply entrenched chapter of American judicial history, characterized by decades of unyielding appellate review, scientific inquiry, and profound societal polarization. As the 21st century advances through its third decade, the fundamental battle lines drawn in the late 1990s have grown remarkably rigid, yet the pursuit of legal remedy and post-conviction relief persists with unwavering determination from her defense teams and dedicated advocates. The ongoing efforts to secure evidentiary hearings, challenge procedural milestones, and utilize modern DNA profiling technologies underscore a broader, systemic tension within capital litigation between the legal principle of finality and the moral imperative of absolute accuracy. For the legal scholars, appellate attorneys, and true crime historians who continue to dissect every facet of the case, the enduring mystery of what transpired inside the Rowlett residence on June 6, 1996, serves as a poignant reminder of the formidable challenges inherent in reconstructing a chaotic, violent crime scene through the retrospective lens of the judicial system. The case remains a permanent fixture in legal discourse, continuously prompting intense examinations of how circumstantial evidence, media influence, and forensic interpretation intersect within the high-stakes arena of a capital trial. Within the maximum security confines of the Patrick O'Daniel unit in Gatesville, Texas, Darlie Routier's continued imprisonment represents the stark, unchanging reality of life on women's death row, a grim environment defined by strict institutional isolation and the heavy psychological burden of an indefinite future. Over the course of nearly 30 years of continuous incarceration, her steadfast insistence upon her absolute innocence has never faltered, providing the central anchor for a dedicated network of supporters who view her ongoing confinement as a tragic miscarriage of justice. Her enduring resilience in the face of insurmountable odds is contrasted sharply by critics and defenders of the original verdict, who maintain that the passage of time and the exhaustion of numerous appellate levels confirm the legal correctness and finality of the 1997 jury's decision. This profound, unbridgeable human divide ensures that every new legal motion, every scientific inquiry, and every public discussion regarding her case continues to evoke intense emotional responses, keeping the tragedy firmly alive in the public consciousness. The personal dimensions of the story, marked by the unimaginable loss of young Devin and Damon, the devastation of a family torn apart, and the relentless machinery of the state, create a narrative of profound sorrow that transcends the boundaries of standard legal proceedings, touching upon universal themes of grief, accusation, and human survival. The broader institutional and academic footprint left by the Darlie Routier trial extends far beyond the borders of Texas, embedding itself deeply into the curriculum of law schools, forensic training programs, and criminological studies across the United States. Academic experts frequently utilize the case as a definitive paradigm for analyzing the profound dangers of pretrial publicity, the powerful impact of emotional media artifacts such as the infamous gravesite silly string video, and the ways in which these external factors can unconsciously shape a jury's perception before a single piece of forensic evidence is fully evaluated. The trial proceedings are meticulously deconstructed to illustrate the subtle yet devastating effects of investigative tunnel vision, wherein initial police impressions harden into rigid prosecutorial narratives, causing investigators to discount alternative hypotheses and ignore external leads that might point toward an unknown perpetrator. Furthermore, forensic pathologists and blood spatter reconstructionists continue to debate the complex medical testimonies presented during the court battles, using the case to explore both the remarkable advancements and the inherent limitations of scientific interpretation when applied to multi-victim domestic crime scenes. These rigorous academic examinations ensure that the tragic events on Eagle Drive will forever serve as a vital teaching tool for future generations of attorneys, investigators, and judges striving to improve the fairness, objectivity, and reliability of the criminal justice system. As the legal proceedings navigate the intricate labyrinth of federal habeas corpus petitions, state appellate reviews, and ongoing petitions for advanced biological testing, the unresolved legal status surrounding the death of Devin Routier remains a fascinating, unique procedural footnote in modern jurisprudence. While Darley was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death exclusively for the capital murder of Damon Rutiu, the parallel indictment involving Devon was formally set aside by prosecutors under standard legal strategy once the maximum penalty of death had been secured for the household tragedy. This calculated procedural reality means that even in the highly hypothetical event of a miraculous appellate victory, a vacated conviction, or a newly granted retrial in the modern era, the state retains the full legal authority to initiate a secondary prosecution regarding Devon's death, ensuring that the legal entanglements surrounding the family would not simply dissolve with a single favorable judicial ruling. This dense, multi-layered web of charges, post-conviction DNA petitions, and constitutional claims creates a uniquely complicated legal puzzle that few contemporary cases can match in sheer scope, emotional resonance, and procedural persistence. Legal analysts and appellate attorneys continuously monitor the docket for any sign of an unprecedented breakthrough, whether through groundbreaking advancements in touch DNA technology, the discovery of previously unexamined physical evidence, or a landmark ruling from a federal appellate court willing to intervene in a long-settled capital conviction. Until such a definitive turning point materializes, the case remains locked in its familiar, agonizing rhythm of legal filings, briefs, and judicial reviews, standing as a perpetual testament to the immense difficulties of balancing finality, justice, and absolute truth within an imperfect human legal system. Ultimately, the complex legacy of the Darley Rutir case resonates deeply within the cultural and legal fabric of the United States, serving as a haunting reminder of the absolute fragility of human existence and the devastating permanence of sudden, catastrophic loss. Whether evaluated through the prism of unwavering defense advocacy, unyielding prosecutorial conviction, or objective academic analysis, the events of June 6, 1996, and their subsequent judicial fallout challenge everyone who encounters them to confront uncomfortable questions regarding the nature of guilt, the fallibility of human memory, the immense power of media framing, and the ultimate morality of capital punishment. The names Devon, Damon, and Darley Rutir are permanently etched into the historical landscape of the nation, acting as a solemn reminder of a quiet suburban home shattered forever by inexplicable violence, and leaving behind a vast repository of unresolved questions that will continue to echo across generations of legal scholars, investigators, and true crime observers for years to come. The final chapter of the Darley Rutir legal saga, as it stands within the contemporary judicial landscape of 2026, represents a profound and enduring testament to the complex, agonizing intersection of capital punishment, forensic science, and post-conviction litigation in modern America. For nearly 30 years, the harrowing events that shattered the quiet suburban neighborhood on Eagle Drive in Rowlett, Texas, have maintained a tight grip on the collective consciousness of the legal community, true crime researchers, and the general public alike. As the decades have rolled forward, the fundamental polarization that defined the original 1997 trial has not dissolved. Rather, it has crystallized into an entrenched ideological divide where every emerging scientific filing, every appellate motion, and every judicial review is scrutinized through the lens of absolute certainty versus profound institutional doubt. The pursuit of justice for young Devon and Damon Rutir remains an open emotional wound, while the legal machinery surrounding their surviving mother continues to grind through an exhaustive, seemingly endless labyrinth of state and federal courtrooms, testing the absolute limits of post-conviction legal relief in capital cases. Within the sterile, maximum security confines of the Patrick O'Daniel unit in Gatesville, Texas, Darley Rutir's protracted incarceration on death row has spanned almost 3 entire decades, shaping a daily existence defined by severe institutional isolation, rigid structural routines, and the immense psychological burden of an indefinite future. Despite the crushing weight of her physical environment and the passage of so many years, Darley has never wavered in her absolute, steadfast insistence upon her total innocence, maintaining that she was the victim of a vicious, unprovoked home invasion perpetrated by an unidentified intruder who managed to slip away into the dark pre-dawn hours. This unwavering denial of guilt has served as the foundational rallying cry for a dedicated, tireless coalition of appellate attorneys, forensic specialists, and passionate true crime advocates who have dedicated their professional lives to dismantling the prosecution's original narrative and uncovering tangible proof of a wrongful condemnation. To this network of supporters, her survival through decades of maximum security confinement is a testament to the resilience of a grieving mother unjustly stripped of her children and her liberty by a legal system blinded by tunnel vision and sensationalized media framing. Conversely, critics, prosecutors, and staunch defenders of the original jury verdict view her enduring presence on death row not as a miscarriage of justice, but as the lawful and necessary consequence of a horrific, premeditated crime, arguing that the passage of time does not dilute the cumulative weight of the physical anomalies, blood spatter evidence, and circumstantial indicators that proved her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. The academic and institutional footprint of the Darlie Routier case remains permanently embedded within university legal clinics, law school classrooms, and forensic training academies across the nation, where it serves as a quintessential, highly complex case study examining the delicate, often volatile intersection of media influence, emotional theater, and scientific interpretation in high-stakes criminal trials. Legal scholars frequently dissect the 1997 proceedings to illustrate the profound dangers of intense pretrial publicity and the ways in which inflammatory media artifacts, most notably the infamous gravesite silly string video, can unconsciously bias a jury, effectively overshadowing objective forensic data and eroding the foundational presumption of innocence. The trial is meticulously evaluated to highlight the subtle yet devastating cognitive traps of investigative tunnel vision, wherein initial police impressions harden into rigid prosecutorial narratives, causing investigators to discount alternative hypotheses, ignore external leads, and prematurely close their minds to the terrifying possibility of an outside perpetrator. Furthermore, forensic pathologists, blood spatter reconstructionists, and trace evidence experts continue to debate the medical and ballistic testimonies presented during the court battles, using the case to explore both the remarkable technological advancements and the inherent limitations of scientific interpretation when applied to multi-victim domestic crime scenes. These rigorous academic explorations guarantee that the tragic events on Eagle Drive will forever serve as a vital teaching tool for future generations of attorneys, investigators, and judges striving to improve the fairness, objectivity, and reliability of the criminal justice system. As the legal proceedings navigate the intricate labyrinth of federal habeas corpus petitions, state appellate reviews, and ongoing petitions for advanced biological testing, the unresolved legal status surrounding the death of Devin Routier remains a fascinating, unique procedural footnote in modern jurisprudence. While Darlie was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death exclusively for the capital murder of Damon Routier, the parallel indictment involving Devin was formally set aside by prosecutors under standard legal strategy once the maximum penalty of death had been secured for the household tragedy. This calculated procedural reality means that even in the highly hypothetical event of a miraculous appellate victory, a vacated conviction, or a newly granted retrial in the modern era, the state retains the full legal authority to initiate a secondary prosecution regarding Devin's death, ensuring that the legal entanglements surrounding the family would not simply dissolve with a single favorable judicial ruling. This dense, multi-layered web of charges, post-conviction DNA petitions, and constitutional claims creates a uniquely complicated legal puzzle that few contemporary cases can match in sheer scope, emotional resonance, and procedural persistence. Legal analysts and appellate attorneys continuously monitor the docket for any sign of an unprecedented breakthrough, whether through groundbreaking advancements in touch DNA technology, the discovery of previously unexamined physical evidence, or a landmark ruling from a federal appellate court willing to intervene in a long-settled capital conviction. Until such a definitive turning point materializes, the case remains locked in its familiar, agonizing rhythm of legal filings, briefs, and judicial reviews, standing as a perpetual testament to the immense difficulties of balancing finality, justice, and absolute truth within an imperfect human legal system. Ultimately, The complex legacy of the Darlie Routier case resonates deeply within the cultural and legal fabric of the United States, serving as a haunting reminder of the absolute fragility of human existence and the devastating permanence of sudden, catastrophic loss. Whether evaluated through the prism of unwavering defense advocacy, unyielding prosecutorial conviction, or objective academic analysis, the events of June 6, 1996, and their subsequent judicial fallout challenge everyone who encounters them to confront uncomfortable questions regarding the nature of guilt, the fallibility of human memory, the immense power of media framing, and the ultimate morality of capital punishment. The names Devin, Damon, and Darlie Routier are permanently etched into the historical landscape of the nation, acting as a solemn reminder of a quiet suburban home shattered forever by inexplicable violence, and leaving behind a vast repository of unresolved questions that will continue to echo across generations of legal scholars, investigators, and true crime observers for years to come. The final concluding documentation of the comprehensive Darlie Routier case dossier reaches its ultimate boundary as the legal and cultural landscape navigates the ongoing realities of the year 2026, encapsulating nearly 3 decades of unbroken judicial friction, emotional polarization, and relentless appellate scrutiny. Across the span of 30 years, the horrific tragedy that unfolded inside the quiet Rowlett residence on that fateful summer night has evolved from a local Texas homicide investigation into a monumental touchstone of modern American true crime history, permanently altering how investigators, legal scholars, and the public perceive the delicate intersections of domestic violence, forensic reconstruction, and capital punishment. The sheer endurance of the legal battles surrounding the conviction of Darlie Routier reflects a profound systemic tension between the court's ultimate desire for judicial finality and the relentless moral imperative to ensure absolute accuracy when a human life hangs in the balance of a death sentence. As every subsequent legal brief, forensic motion, and appellate review is meticulously filed and contested, the case continues to resist simple categorization, standing instead as a vast, multi-layered puzzle of conflicting human narratives, disputed physical evidence, and unyielding ideological divisions that refuse to dissipate with the passage of time. Deep within the maximum security confines of the Patrick O'Daniel unit in Gatesville, Texas, Darlie Routier's protracted existence on death row provides a stark, unchanging testament to the heavy psychological toll and rigid institutional realities of long-term capital imprisonment. Having inhabited the specialized women's death row facilities for nearly 3 full decades, her daily routine is defined by extreme isolation, strict structural regimentation, and the crushing weight of an indefinite future where every passing year mirrors the harsh restrictions of the last. Throughout this immense duration, Darlie has never once wavered in her absolute, steadfast insistence upon her total innocence, maintaining through every legal setback and public scrutiny that she was the victim of a brutal, unprovoked home invasion perpetrated by an unidentified intruder who vanished into the dark pre-dawn hours. This unwavering denial of guilt has served as the enduring rallying cry for a dedicated, tireless coalition of appellate attorneys, forensic investigators, and passionate true crime advocates who have devoted their professional lives to dismantling the state's original narrative and uncovering tangible proof of a wrongful conviction. To this network of supporters, her remarkable endurance through decades of maximum security confinement represents the quiet heroism of a grieving mother unjustly stripped of her young children and her fundamental liberty by an adversarial legal system blinded by tunnel vision and sensationalized media framing. Conversely, prosecutors, crime victims' rights advocates, and staunch defenders of the original jury verdict view her enduring presence on death row not as an ongoing miscarriage of justice, but as the lawful and necessary consequence of a horrific, premeditated crime, arguing that the passage of time does not dilute the cumulative weight of the physical anomalies, blood spatter evidence, and circumstantial indicators that proved her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. The academic and institutional footprint of the Darlie Routier trial remains permanently embedded within university legal clinics, law school classrooms, and forensic training academies across the nation, where it serves as a quintessential, highly complex case study examining the delicate, often volatile intersection of media influence, emotional theater, and scientific interpretation in high-stakes criminal trials. Legal scholars frequently dissect the 1997 proceedings to illustrate the profound dangers of intense pretrial publicity and the ways in which inflammatory media artifacts, most notably the infamous gravesite silly string video, can unconsciously bias a jury, effectively overshadowing objective forensic data and eroding the foundational presumption of innocence. The trial is meticulously evaluated to highlight the subtle, yet devastating cognitive traps of investigative tunnel vision, wherein initial police impressions harden into rigid prosecutorial narratives, causing investigators to discount alternative hypotheses, ignore external leads, and prematurely close their minds to the terrifying possibility of an outside perpetrator. Furthermore, forensic pathologists, blood spatter reconstructionists, and trace evidence experts continue to debate the medical and ballistic testimonies presented during the court battles, using the case to explore both the remarkable technological advancements and the inherent limitations of scientific interpretation when applied to multi-victim domestic crime scenes. These rigorous academic explorations guarantee that the tragic events on Eagle Drive will forever serve as a vital teaching tool for future generations of attorneys, investigators, and judges striving to improve the fairness, objectivity, and reliability of the criminal justice system. As the legal proceedings navigate the intricate labyrinth of federal habeas corpus petitions, state appellate reviews, and ongoing petitions for advanced biological testing, the unresolved legal status surrounding the death of Devin Routier remains a fascinating, unique procedural footnote in modern jurisprudence. While Darley was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death exclusively for the capital murder of Damon Routier, the parallel indictment involving Devin was formally set aside by prosecutors under standard legal strategy once the maximum penalty of death had been secured for the household tragedy. This calculated procedural reality means that even in the highly hypothetical event of a miraculous appellate victory, a vacated conviction, or a newly granted retrial in the modern era, the state retains the full legal authority to initiate a secondary prosecution regarding Devin's death, ensuring that the legal entanglements surrounding the family would not simply dissolve with a single favorable judicial ruling. This dense, multi-layered web of charges, post-conviction DNA petitions, and constitutional claims creates a uniquely complicated legal puzzle that few contemporary cases can match in sheer scope, emotional resonance, and procedural persistence. Legal analysts and appellate attorneys continuously monitor the docket for any sign of an unprecedented breakthrough, whether through groundbreaking advancements in touch DNA technology, the discovery of previously unexamined physical evidence, or a landmark ruling from a federal appellate court willing to intervene in a long-settled capital conviction. Until such a definitive turning point materializes, the case remains locked in its familiar, agonizing rhythm of legal filings, briefs, and judicial reviews, standing as a perpetual testament to the immense difficulties of balancing finality, justice, and absolute truth within an imperfect human legal system. Ultimately, the complex legacy of the Darley Routier case resonates deeply within the cultural and legal fabric of the United States, serving as a haunting reminder of the absolute fragility of human existence and the devastating permanence of sudden, catastrophic loss. Whether evaluated through the prism of unwavering defense advocacy, unyielding prosecutorial conviction, or objective academic analysis, the events of June 6, 1996, and their subsequent judicial fallout challenge everyone who encounters them to confront uncomfortable questions regarding the nature of guilt, the fallibility of human memory, the immense power of media framing, and the ultimate morality of capital punishment. The names Devin, Damon, and Darley Routier are permanently etched into the historical landscape of the nation, acting as a solemn reminder of a quiet suburban home shattered forever by inexplicable violence, and leaving behind a vast repository of unresolved questions that will continue to echo across generations of legal scholars, investigators, and true crime observers for years to come.